Welcome. Welcome here to the special place where we have over hundreds of people gathered today to come to the Proclaim 2018 conference. Here we have clergy from around Australia. We also have bishops from Australia, New Zealand, and even one from Cambodia. It's fantastic to have so many people here, and lay leaders from the church also gathered. My name is Melissa Fennick, and I'm a Parish Support and Project Officer for the Youth Evangelisation Office here in the Archdiocese of Brisbane. Proclaim 2018 is about culture change. It's about listening to the Spirit, listening to each other, and hearing the wisdom that others have to share with each other. So now let us first go and listen to Archbishop Mark Coleridge, who will give us his input into what Proclaim Conference is all about. Proclaim 2018 is about inspiring, encouraging and equipping parishes in parish renewal and evangelisation. This morning I have with me Archbishop Mark. Thank you for being here. Can you give us a few words around why conferences like Proclaim 2018 are important for parishes?
Well, first of all, they're a great boost to morale at a time when we need to boost morale, because when you get 700 people from all over Australia and beyond our shores together like this, it generates tremendous energy, and at the heart of that energy there is the sign of hope. So that's one of the things that's very important about a thing like Proclaim. The other thing is to generate new ideas, new energies, new creativity at the local level, and not just allow the show to roll on, because this is a time when we do have to try new things. We have to be sensible in what we try, but we do have to have a kind of new apostolic imagination, new ways of proclaiming the good news of Jesus Christ, new ways of experiencing the good news of Jesus Christ ourselves. And that's what Proclaim is all about, is the sharing of ideas, listening to people who have experience and who have shown a certain creativity, at a time when the whole church in Australia needs that kind of energy, because Proclaim is all about not looking inwards but looking outwards and generating new energy for a new quality of missionary life in the church. Because the danger at the moment is we can turn inwards and try and protect ourselves and just talk to one another. But there's a whole world out there, and we've got to talk to the whole world, and we might need new images, new words, new gestures, in the way Pope Francis has shown. That's what Proclaim is all about, and why it really does matter.
Proclamare, to cry forth.
With me now is Cardinal John Dew, from the Archdiocese of Wellington. He's the Archbishop there and President of the New Zealand Catholic Bishops' Conference, and is also the head of the Military Ordinariate of New Zealand. So welcome to Proclaim 2018, Your Evidence. It's great for you to be here. You're about to give your keynote into leadership in a time of change. Can you give us a snapshot of some of the key points you will cover in your presentation this morning?
Sure, I'm looking forward to this presentation at the Proclaim 2018. The whole theme of the conference, Make Your Home in Me. I'll begin by looking at Make Your Home in Me, and that really means sort of comparing what it means to feel at home with other people or in someone else's home, and then to say that Jesus also is at home with us. And in order to know that, we need to be people of prayer. And once we are at home with Him, and we know that He's at home with us and He accompanies us, then we are called to make a difference. And there are all sorts of ways that we can do that in society today, even though there might be times when we're a little timid or shy or embarrassing. But because we have such a powerful message, and we know that the Spirit of God's with us, we should never be afraid once we do know that our home has been made with Jesus, because we've encountered Him. I'm going to talk about encounter, an encounter not just being a one-off meeting, it's an ongoing meeting. Just as our spiritual life is like a spiral, it's going deeper and deeper as our lives go by. It's never just a one-off event or a linear sort of thing. we're growing in depth all the time in our relationship with Jesus, that means that our response to people around us is also growing. So that's the kind of thing I'll be talking about. Towards the end, I'm going to say something about I've got a number of quotes from Pope Francis about various things, and especially the call to go out. But I'm also going to quote from Amoris Laetitia, the document on the family, where he talks about no family drops down from heaven perfectly formed. But that's for the same for all of us. None of us are perfectly formed. We're all on a journey, and we can help one another. And I guess one of the key points too is also another area of one of his encyclicals, the encyclical on the environment, where he talks about we can create, if we can create warm and loving communities where people feel that they belong and they know that they're at home, then we have the opportunity for turning what for some people seems like hell on earth into the setting for a dignified life, which is what we're called to be if we live at one and at home with Jesus.
We've gathered today and over these few days around that very profound theme of make your home in me. In the words of American poet and civil rights angelist Maya Angelou, the ache for a home lives in all of us. That ache can live on many levels, exists on many levels. It can be the need for a physical house, the tragedies of refugees who have fled their country, the anxiety of so many people, especially young people, as they search for an affordable home in an unaffordable housing market. It can be the yearning for people who really just want to be themselves, people or person who helps them to feel known, safe and loved. It can be a sense of gratitude and connection as our plane arrives back home after we've been in a place which hasn't been home and where we may have been uncomfortable. That ache for home is a deep sense within us, a sense that there's a home somewhere beyond, below, above, behind, beneath our need for a house, for people and community. It's an ache for a deeper home, which is spiritual in nature. When Jesus said, make your home in me, he invited us into a relationship which can meet our deepest need for a home. But we have to want to live in that home, and we have to want to make it our own. It's not a passive relationship, and it's not instant. It requires work on our part. It involves homemaking, which, as we know, is an ongoing process, not something that's accomplished just in one act or at one particular time. Making our home in Jesus is a process of coming to know him deeply and over time being formed by the experience of us trying to live in union with him. Our continuing formation is not a linear process, learning something and then moving on to the next. Our formation is more like spiral learning, in which we encounter the same subject over and over again, but each time deepen our understanding. Just think of the experience we have of our liturgies, particularly if we think of the example of the Easter season. We celebrate Holy Thursday, Good Friday, Holy Saturday, the Easter Vigil, and each time we have the chance to delve a little deeper and deeper. And delving deeper into the richness of the Easter mysteries each year is homemaking because we come to a greater depth. Making our home with Jesus in pursuit of holiness is the same kind of thing. It's not linear, it's spiral. The process of making our home in Jesus isn't necessarily easy. It's possible that we might think that we've found that home when in fact we have been misled. In Evangelisation Gaude et Exultate, Pope Francis says, like the prophet Jonah, we're constantly tempted to flee to a safe haven. It can have many names: individualism, spiritualism, living in a little world, addiction, intransigence, the rejection of new ideas and approaches, dogmatism, nostalgia, pessimism, hiding behind rules and regulations. We can probably add to that list of false havens which Pope Francis identifies. There may be some kind of comfort and safety in those false havens, especially when they are religious in nature, and it may seem at times that we've made our home with Jesus. There are people who have taken refuge in false homes who never enter a church, and there are people living in those false homes who are daily mass goers. So how do we ensure that we're not misled into thinking that we've made our home with Jesus, when in fact we might have imprisoned ourselves in a rigid misunderstanding of the Jesus we follow? How do we ensure that we are truly living in that home that he wants to share with us? In the second part of that paragraph from Gaudete et Exultate, which I've just quoted, he gives us the key. He says we can resist leaving behind a familiar and easy way of doing things, yet the challenges involved can be like the storm, the whale, the worm that dried the gourd plant, or the wind and sun that burned Jonah's head. For us, as for him, they can serve to bring us back to the God of tenderness, who invites us to set out ever anew on our journey. We're invited to come back to the God of tenderness if we're lost in dogmatism, pessimism, nostalgia, individualism, hiding behind rules and regulations, which is very easy to do in the church. In a surprising TED talk that Pope Francis gave last year, he spoke about the God of tenderness. He said, "The third message I would like to share today is indeed about revolution, the revolution of tenderness. And what is tenderness? It is the love that comes close and becomes real. It is a movement that starts from our heart and reaches the eyes, the ears, and the hands. Tenderness means to use our eyes to see the other, our ears to hear the other, to listen to the children, the poor, those who are afraid of the future, to listen also to the silent cry of our common home, of our sick and polluted earth. Tenderness means to use our hands and our heart to comfort the other, to take care of those in need." Those words of Pope Francis can easily be turned for us into a kind of tenderness test, a way of regularly checking if are we making our home in Jesus. So look at these simple questions and just for a moment think to yourself, without talking to anybody else, what emerges for you. You may want to focus on one question rather than all of them. Tenderness is the love that comes close and becomes real. It's a movement that starts from our heart and reaches the eyes, the ears, and the hands. Have I experienced this recently? Tenderness means to use our eyes to see the other, our ears to hear the other, our hands and our heart to comfort the other, to listen to the children, to the poor, to the young maybe, to those who are afraid of the future. Have we had an opportunity to do that? Tenderness means to listen to the silent cry of our common home, our sick and polluted earth. Have we heard this cry, acted on it, even in a small way? Tenderness is doing as Jesus did, who lived his entire human existence practicing the real, concrete language of love. Have I experienced the real, concrete language of love from another, or been able to offer it to another? If we drive around the residential streets of any of our cities, it's obvious that no two homes are the same. Even in situations of disaster, when people are building temporary homes and be given the same materials, they're never the same. I think that's a reflection of one of the great attributes of humankind. We are all different, we are all unique, and that's been the case forever. Our difference means that each of us will make our home with Jesus in a different way. Again, in Gaudete et Exultate, Pope Francis says, "The important thing is that each believer discern his or her own path, that they bring out the very best of themselves, the most personal gifts that God has placed in their hearts, rather than hopelessly trying to imitate something not meant for them, not imitating someone else. The important thing that each believer discern his or her own path. Discernment, as we know, is a process of listening to God. Archbishop Mark's already spoken to us today about listening. And as we listen, arriving at answers in a prayerful way. A good discernment process brings for us clarity and inner peace. If there is anxiety or unease, personal issues getting in the way, discernment's an essential tool for making our home with Jesus, something we should learn to practice in every aspect of our lives. It's discernment which enables us to find the one specific path that the Lord has for us in making our unique home with Him. There are two parts, and we heard that beautifully proclaimed this morning. Make your home in me, two parts to that verse. The second is, as I make mine in you. It's difficult for me to separate those two parts of that verse. I've asked myself many times, how do we assist, how do we help people to feel at home with Jesus? How do we help people to believe, to actually believe that Jesus is at home with them, that He wants to be at home with them? And I think maybe that's a specific question that we ask and reflect on when we're reflecting about young people in our church today. Because we simply cannot do as we've always done in our efforts to enable people to find a home with Jesus. Change is constant in our lives. The church's ability to carry out its mission depends on our openness to the opportunities and challenges before us which change presents in our age and every time and every place. We know that every age is a time of change simply because change is a constant in our living systems. And it may mean, as we heard from Shane, get out of the boat. Over recent years, we've thought we were making radical changes, both here in Australia and in New Zealand, as we went through the process of amalgamating parishes. It was a necessary response as we looked at fewer clergy and the viability of small parishes. But even in many places, it had the unintended effect of turning us inward, even while we were saying that we were organising ourselves for mission. We're much more comfortable with ministry and formation within the parish than with mission outside the parish. So evangelisation does remain one of our biggest challenges. And it is about encounter. Archbishop Mark gave us that wonderful example, which we've heard over the last couple of weeks. The boys trapped in the cave, someone appearing, "Who are you?" "We're from England." That encounter with Jesus for us is referred to as being the start of our Christian mission. In English, an encounter is an unexpected meeting, a one-off event, which is quite different to making our home with someone, which involves a continuing encounter. Encounter, or as Pope Francis uses the word in Spanish, encuentro. Encuentro actually has a spiritual dimension, which is lacking in our English word encounter. Father Tom Rossiter of Salt and Light TV in Canada explains it like this. In Spanish, it's loaded with more meaning than the English reading's meaning is able to convey. To see the world through the lens of encounter is to realise the presence of God all around us, that we are connected to each other through both visible and invisible ties. For him, the culture of encounter moves us to walk the journey of our lives tenderly, holding each other's hands and knowing that Christ, who is our faithful, silent companion on the journey. It is in the continued encounter with Jesus as we do the work of homemaking with him that matters. Encounter through the sacraments, through prayer, learning to listen to his voice, serving and accompanying others, walking in his way. No matter how hard we work at homemaking with Jesus, the continued encounter may be uncomfortable as we look at what we do in terms of evangelization. There are many factors which may quash our missionary impulse as we need to go to delve deeper and deeper into the difficulties with evangelization. They're more than just simply saying, well, it's too difficult. The encounter may be there, but there are other factors too, I believe, that are intervening to our close personal road to evangelization. There are 5 particular factors I'd like to highlight. Misconceptions. Many Catholics shy away from the word evangelization, equating it with talking to strangers in the street and talking about their faith. They may understand it, therefore, in a way which is closer to proselytizing than evangelization, and quite rightly then reject it. With all the starry-eyed meeting Jesus people who accost us in our homes and on the street, it's actually quite a good impulse to stay away from proselytization. The second is embarrassment. Being Catholic is not easy in a world, as we know, which has been appalled by revelations of sexual abuse and cover-ups. I'm acutely conscious that while bishops and priests might be the target of media attack and scorn, it's nothing compared to the shame and embarrassment that many Catholics experience in their workplace and communities. Therefore, acknowledging their Catholicism is hard enough without trying to share it with others. There may also be lack of opportunities for some people, because some of our most committed Catholics actually mix very little with people of other Christian denominations or of other faiths. Particularly if you work in a parish or a diocesan centre, if you're very involved in your parish in ministry and social life, there's probably very little opportunity to meet people outside Catholic circles. People who work in schools do tend at times to meet people who are on the fringes of the Catholic community. But then the pressures of school life make it too easy to miss the opportunities for evangelization. Then there's fear of rejection. One of the deepest levels, or the deepest fears we all have, is that of being rejected by others. And our society is very much based on live and let live. And social acceptance means that any attempt to persuade others to our way of thinking may result in an attack or rejection. We know that social media can be very vicious and wounding. Attempting to share our faith sometimes can be like swimming with hungry sharks. Talking about our faith is not done in many families, workplaces, or in the wider community. And while an attempt to share our faith may not resist in sharks attacking us, our fellow fish may just swim quietly away because it's too hard. And then for people, sometimes there's our own doubts. Some Catholics feel that they're hanging on to their faith by their fingernails, struggling with doubts and difficulty in being part of a faith community because of their own life situation. Many people find it hard to agree with some aspects of the Church's moral teaching. They feel they're unable to defend it among non-Catholics. Doing that in an environment which is very secular and sometimes quite hostile to any form of faith can be too uncomfortable to consider. How real are those factors for each of us? There are a few more simple questions to reflect on. Who do I mix with mostly in my wider family, in the workplace, in my activities, in the community? Catholics, non-Catholics, those who have disconnected from the Church. What doubts do I have about my faith or aspects of the Church's teaching? What effect does publicity about clergy sexual abuse have on me? What's my perception of evangelization? Have I had experiences of rejection or hostility as a Catholic which makes me wary? For both those sets of questions, there may be opportunities as you reflect over these few days just to continue responding in your own lives on those questions. People will be familiar with the organisation, the NGO Habitat for Humanity, which helps people build houses. In a recent survey, they asked people they had helped the question, what does home mean for you? And they put some of those responses on a website. My favourite was from someone named Kelly. And Kelly said, home means a future. Once we had a stable home, we could think beyond where we were going to live from week to week and where we could begin to look ahead to where we wanted to go. Home is the base where everything begins. Home is the base where everything begins. But we may be tempted to stay in that home, to settle into a quiet life of prayer and a comfortable life in our parish. Instead of home being the base where everything begins, nothing may begin because of all those reasons I've just outlined. Fear of rejection, embarrassment, doubts, restricted opportunities. It can just be too hard, psychologically and emotionally challenging. So we can retreat to the comfort of our own spiritual exercise, our own Catholic companions, and the work of reorganising our parish homes. We do need a new paradigm. Do we understand, though, the change that is taking place in evangelisation? Over the last 5 years, I believe we've been given masterclasses by Pope Francis. He's opened up new opportunities and ways of thinking about pastoral ministry, mission, and evangelisation. He's given us a much deeper awareness of the many Catholics who are on the peripheries of the church and whose sense of exclusion from their spiritual home is indeed a deep ache. He's drawn our attention to those who have turned their back on the church because of a rigid interpretation of church teaching which demands perfection and which doesn't recognise the gradual growth and goodness which we all experience. He points us constantly to the door of our parish home and says, go out, and has sharpened our awareness of those who live on the peripheries of our affluent societies and on the peripheries of the church. At the end of the first session of the Synod on the Family in 2014, Pope Francis gave a wonderful talk at the end, and he said, go out. And then he said, actually, I'm using the wrong word, I mean get out there. And he was really emphasising we're to get out there to where people need us to help them to feel at home. If we are to enable people to make their home in Jesus, then we're called to understand the challenges and opportunities of 2018 and to be willing to do things differently. That may elicit acid letters of protest from some of our people who don't see that our task is mission. It may also involve some risks, meaning that we don't always get it right. But I think that's part of what Pope Francis meant when he said, I prefer a church which is bruised, hurting and dirty because it's been out on the streets, rather than a church which is unhealthy from being confined and from clinging to its own security. A church which is dirty, bruised and hurting. We've already been told today that the Holy Spirit is messy. The message we continually receive from Pope Francis are to go out, to practice the works of mercy, to listen to people and be close to them. All of this is an evangelisation of presence rather than of words. It's being with those who suffer, who are marginalised, who are poor, who are hurt or lost. The love of Jesus is communicated in our encounter with others if we're willing to go and be where they are, if we're prepared to listen to them, to love and to accompany them, to be with them rather than talk at them, to address their real physical and emotional needs as a result of our listening and our practical actions. It's not just about changing living conditions, it's about creating an inclusive community. And I believe he's put this incredibly well in Laudato Si. He's talking here about cities of the world that are polluted and there's no clean water. And he says the feeling of asphyxiation brought about by densely populated residential areas is countered if close and warm relationships develop, if communities are created, if the limitations of the environment are compensated for in the interior of each person who feels held within a network of solidarity and belonging. In this way, any place can turn from being hell on earth into the setting for a dignified life. I believe that can apply to our parishes as well as those cities, those polluted, enormous, overpopulated cities of the world, because we have people in our own communities for whom life seems like hell on earth. We can create a setting for a dignified life and help them to make their home in Jesus. Last year in the Archdiocese of Wellington, we had a diocesan synod. It's become a pattern for the last 30 years now. The synod process took most of the year. A little bit like your plenary, it began long before the actual weekend. Throughout that year, we deepened our understanding of the synod theme, which in Maori is Haere Tukuna, Go You Are Sent. In the early pre-synod workshops, participants were asked to reflect on the question, what would a parish look like which had fully embraced Go You Are Sent? A very strong theme which came from those initial responses was that the parish needed to be welcoming, and we all know that. For many people, Go You Are Sent was interpreted at first as bringing people into the parish. We know a welcoming parish is desirable, but it's not the central point. It's going out, as Francis has spoken so often. Going out to the peripheries of our faith communities and the peripheries of our society is about service to people in need where they are, bringing the love of Christ to them in their particular circumstances. So later in our synod year, the welcoming parishes theme was much less prominent in the discussions and in the responses to the consultation process. And the emphasis began to shift to being service to people in need in the parish and in the wider community. People began to grasp that what Pope Francis is talking about when he speaks of the people on the peripheries and being a poor church for the poor meant that we needed to get out. The consultation process showed us that there are a number of practical issues in responding to the call to go out. There was incredible goodwill towards going out, but uncertainty about how to do it, and about how to do it in a way that respects the dignity of people. Being called to go beyond one's comfort zone was mentioned, and people spoke of being nervous and unsure of what to do. They said, these are some of the responses, often we cannot tell who's on the peripheries. They're not visible to us. We have no experience of them, and we don't know how to behave or what we do when we meet them. Peripheries can sometimes simply mean outside the church. Going there involves taking risks and actually doing something. Going out to society's peripheries will demand that we go to and beyond our own personal peripheries. The question was asked, how do you distinguish between someone in need versus someone intent on doing harm? The issues are a can of worms. We may be sent beyond our comfort zone. Sometimes we feel we can't approach people at the peripheries as it would be an invasion of their privacy. However, those comments were also accompanied by a resolve. And people began to say, the Pope's encouraging us to go out of our buildings and find those on the peripheries. The poor, the imprisoned, the sick are unlikely to come to us. We are to see the Lord in the marginalised and serve him through our service of them. We're to go out and do, not stay in our church and write reports. It's hard to know where to start, but it's not sufficient to stay sitting in the pews. There was some comfort for people in the idea that they could go out with others in a team, and it was often mentioned, well, Jesus sent his disciples out in twos. We know that Catholics are very open to involvement in organisations which are not Catholic, and many people do this on an individual basis. Catholic support, volunteer or financial, for community organisations is actually part of going out. And people who are doing this are already doing what Pope Francis asks of us. When asked by a journalist what Christians lack in order for this going out to become the norm, the Pope said there's need for courage, since we are comfortable and comfort betrays us. In our own responses to the Synod, people often spoke about that difficulty of going beyond their comfort zone. And the question became then, how do we encourage one another to go beyond our comfort zone? These were some of the answers. We know that we don't go out alone. Make your home in me is the theme we're reflecting on. And a few verses later, there's another invitation from Jesus where he says, remain in my love. That for me is an invitation to prayer and a definition of prayer. It's an invitation to stay with him, to be in his presence, not to say or do anything, but simply to be at home with him and let him be at home with me. It's wide because we're invited to remain in his love at all times, whatever I'm doing and whoever I'm with. And so Francis put it beautifully in the context of evangelisation. We are called to pray more and go out, but always with prayer because I go with the Lord. We are awake to the opportunities of love. Sometimes we block out our opportunities to be the presence of Christ for another. It's as if we see them in need, but in our peripheral vision, then quickly block them from our sight on the grounds that we don't have time or we can't afford to get involved or we don't have the means to help. We sometimes limit our self-opportunities to be the presence of Christ to another. When Cardinal Francis Nguyen Van Thuan of Vietnam was imprisoned for many years, 14 years in solitary confinement, he refused to waste time waiting for the day he would be set free. He chose, he said, to live the present moment, filling it to the brim with love. He decided, I will seize the occasions that present themselves every day. I will accomplish ordinary actions in an extraordinary way. In his first document, Evangelii Gaudium, Francis said, being a disciple of Jesus constantly means being ready constantly to bring the love of Jesus to others. This can happen unexpectedly in any place, on the street, in a city square, during work or on a journey. We understand the effects of death. These are extraordinary opportunities for evangelisation in our normal parish ministry. Non-Catholics and disconnected Catholics come to our parishes for weddings and baptism, and particularly for funerals. We may take our funeral liturgies for granted, but they can be deeply impressive for many non-church people. The music, the attention to the person's story, the participation of family and friends, a homily, a eulogy, the graveside rituals, the various events that make up the whole process of a funeral ritual are often different experiences for people who've only ever experienced a very short service in a funeral parlour. They find a joyful element in our Catholic funerals because we really believe that the person is one with God. For people of little or no faith, the funeral brings them face to face with death. And it's a time when the veneer of our busy life is removed and people often open up to deeper things. They can be an incredible opportunity for encounter and evangelisation. And we're honest about the orientation of our parish. We know that our parishes can be hives of activity, lots of groups operating, many activities, a priest is a wonderful preacher, and the parish roll growing and growing. But if all the activity is about the parish, then no matter how much of it is there is, or how many people we touch, aren't we facing inwards? Rather than multiplying the formation opportunities and the ministry activities, the honest parish will take time to look closely at whether its genuine orientation and commitment to going out to our own church peripheries and the peripheries of society. And we start small. And thinking about how we go out, how it might actually be done together, the temptation is to develop in our enthusiasm large plans and programs. Large plans can sometimes stop us from what we really want to do. St. Teresa of Avila gave us a timeless warning in relation to grand plans which sometimes can paralyse us. She said, "The devil frequently fills our thoughts with great schemes, so that instead of putting our hands to what we work at and how we serve the Lord, we may rest satisfied with wishing to perform impossibilities. We can do small things." Think of what we do as the mustard seed. It may grow into a large tree, but that's down the track, or it may not happen. The concrete small action is achievable, and what follows is the work of the Holy Spirit. Perhaps the first thing we do is to offer our support to organisations in the community, Catholic or non-Catholic, which are already doing good things to help society. And finally, in that section, we look for new leadership roles, new leaders and new initiatives. We have established leadership roles in our faith communities, and we have recognised ministry roles. Too often, our concept of succession and gift discernment is just about filling those roles, and that becomes our focus when we think about the parish. Changing the question from what does the parish need to what are the needs of our community, or as we've heard today, particularly what are the needs of our young people, can bring forth creative initiatives in many people who have never been involved in any form of leadership in the church. We had a wonderful example during the year of ministry in the Archdiocese of Wellington. We asked school principals, what is the greatest need in your schools today? And it was at this time of the year. The answer was automatic from so many schools: shoes. Because so many people struggle to have clean, dry shoes. So our Year of Mercy group created a diocesan-wide drive for new schools for school children, not just for Catholic schools. Shoes flooded in, all new, different styles, shapes and sizes, together with a whole lot of money to buy more shoes. St. Vincent de Paul Society undertook to deliver them to a whole range of schools. Leaders emerged in response to that invitation and to that plea, what do you actually need? Perhaps we've not looked closely enough at community needs in our search for new leaders. During these 3 days, I have absolutely no doubt that we will experience a wonderful gathering. The people that we mix with are a cross-section of some of the most committed and experienced fellow Catholics. We will encourage one another, learn from one another and teach one another, and we will pray together. In many ways, these days will be an alternative reality. But I want to share with you something that my predecessor, Cardinal Tom Williams, who was the Archbishop before me, wrote in a pastoral letter 30 years ago. He said to the Archdiocese of Wellington, I have to be a realist, like yourselves, and accept that the most telling image of the church is an untidy caravan struggling across the desert, not a regiment of infantry marching in perfect step across an immaculate parade ground. We are, after all, the people of God, and people are imperfect and contradictory. To know it, we only have to look at ourselves. The most telling image of the church is an untidy caravan. We may want it perfect, we may want it looking good, but it's not going to be like that. As Mark said this morning, the Holy Spirit is messy. For a few days in this place, we can walk in step in this wonderful environment. But we too are part of the untidy caravan struggling across the desert. We are imperfect and contradictory. and we've been called to accompany one another and others, all of whom are part of this untidy caravan, and those who may wish to join it, and those who in fact are watching from a distance. I think one of the most important things Pope Francis said in his document on the family, Amoris Laetitia, and so many families have found comfort and consolation, and it was those words, "No family drops down from heaven perfectly formed. Families need to constantly grow and mature in the ability to love." Well, we know that of ourselves. No one drops down from heaven perfectly formed. It's true not just of our families, but of every one of us. That's why we constantly look to one another and not just stay within the group that's very much like ourselves. If we're in the centre of the front row leading the caravan, we may not have too much knowledge of what's happening on the edges or at the back. We're called to be outriders, constantly circling the caravan, listening to and understanding those who walk in its different paths, and looking out for those in the distance who are attracted to the caravan. In making our home with Jesus, we are called to make our home as outriders in the peripheries. Thank you, everyone.
Proclaim Conference is all about encouraging parish renewal. What does an evangelising parish community look like to you?
I think an evangelising parish community is someone who the whole parish is involved not just in the life of the parish, but in the needs of the community around them. They might be needs of Catholics who are no longer practising, but to be able to reach out and say, what are the needs of those people? How can the church offer them, even if it's just a physical space for a children's playgroup or for a book club or something, so that people are making that contact with the church? But then, of course, it goes deeper in looking into what are the wider needs of the community, where there are homeless, where there are families struggling to make ends meet, so that the parish is not just looking at itself and its own formation and its own ministry activities, but that it's also about how we go out and make a difference in the lives of others because we believe in Jesus, because we believe in the gospel, and that's what he calls to. So an evangelising parish is active and involved, not just in the parish, but in the whole wider community.